Trump's incoming administration plans on making denaturalization a focus in immigration enforcement in his second term. Now, I know there's been a lot of information out there about denaturalization, with some people saying that talking about this is essentially fear-mongering. But it isn't fear-mongering, these are just facts about a policy that he did raise last time around, and a policy that can affect immigrants going forward. So let's talk about what denaturalization is. Denaturalization is the process of revoking someone's citizenship if the government discovers that citizenship was obtained fraudulently. Now, this specifically applies to naturalized citizens, or people who legally became United States citizens through the process of naturalization. To initiate denaturalization, the government must claim that you committed fraud, that you concealed material facts, or other disqualifying criminal activity that would have made you ineligible for naturalization. There's also a specific process that has to be followed. First, the Department of Homeland Security or Immigration Customs Enforcement has to actually investigate you. And they do this if they suspect that there was fraud in someone's naturalization application. If they believe they have a valid case, they refer you to the U.S. Attorney's Office. If the case is then brought to federal court, a judge would decide if your citizenship should be revoked. Now, denaturalization cases have existed for decades, but they were rare and largely limited to very serious cases. Under the Obama administration, the approach to denaturalization was focusing on people with severe criminal issues or cases where national security was at play. The aim was to pursue egregious cases and not large-scale denaturalization. But under Trump last time, he took a more aggressive approach. The task force that he created during his first term, while it expanded significantly, it targeted thousands of naturalized citizens. By 2018, the number of cases under review had grown to 2,500, and this was in contrast to the Obama administration, which was at about 120 cases. So let's talk about a real case of denaturalization. There's a story of Norma Bragano. She was a grandmother who lived in Miami for decades after immigrating from Peru. Her case highlights how Trump's expanded denaturalization policy did not necessarily affect people who were violent criminals or threats to national security, but instead regular people who've cooperated with authorities and believed that they had left their legal issues in the past. So Norma became a United States citizen in 2007. She had built her life in the U.S. for years. She was active in her community and raised her family here, but she also held a position as a secretary for a company whose owner was later charged in a fraud scheme. Norma, while involved in the company's operations, was not the mastermind of the scheme. In fact, she didn't even know the extent of the fraud at the time. So when authorities started investigating her employer, she cooperated with them. In fact, her full cooperation helped authorities build a case against her employer. She did plead guilty for conspiracy to commit mail fraud and received a sentence of house arrest and then parole. And at this point, Norma thought her past was behind her. She didn't hide from her responsibilities, and there was no indication of an attempt to deceive authorities or immigration officials. But years later, during the Trump administration, Norma's citizenship came under scrutiny as part of this broader push to investigate naturalized citizens, specifically for potential fraud. The government argued that because she didn't disclose her involvement in her employer's scheme, her citizenship application was fraudulent, despite the fact she'd served her sentence and cooperated with investigators. Now, there's a question on the naturalization application that asks, have you ever committed a crime for which you weren't arrested? And the fraud scheme was going on at that time, but she wasn't aware as to the extent of the fraud, and she answered no to the question. She didn't omit this information out of malice. She simply wasn't aware that her involvement, especially considering her cooperation, could still jeopardize her naturalization years later. So Norma's story is about someone who thought they really moved past a difficult chapter in their life. The equities here, her lack of knowledge about the risks, her cooperation with law enforcement, and her contributions to her community as a mother and a grandmother show how expanded denaturalization policies can really impact those who are not threats to national security. This case really brings up questions about fairness and how these policies are applied to individuals who don't fit with the typical profile that we think of when we think of fraud or criminal intent. So if you're somebody who's gotten naturalized and you didn't commit fraud in the process or failed to disclose criminal history, then yes, you should be completely safe from denaturalization. But the concern here is that the methods applied during the Trump administration last time, they really can create a vulnerability for many naturalized citizens who have these kinds of minor issues or other minor infractions or technicalities from years or even decades ago. It can create a vulnerability for individuals from certain Muslim majority countries or other politically targeted countries. So the concern here is that denaturalization is not necessarily going to be used to address serious fraud, but for casting suspicion on the legal immigration process itself. So again, this isn't about spreading fear, it's about staying informed. By understanding the facts, we can better grasp what these changes mean for our communities and advocate for fairness in the process. For more immigration news and information, feel free to give us a follow.